for voices to be amplified who might not otherwise
The new
get a voice.
talkback?
Yeah, which I think is true, but I think that that social media also, unfortunately, creates this this atmosphere that you were alluding to, really, where people are just we've lost our ability to argue in sensible ways, people say things on social media and pile on.
They're piling on you, Ben Thomas.
You know this, Ben, because you're big on Twitter. They do things on social media in ways that they would never do to each other's faces. And I think we've lost the ability to actually have a reasonable argument in the way that we would if we were in the room together. Because social media just creates that that kind of very low stakes environment.
What I think is social media makes people feel like they're participants in something rather than observers. So rather than sort of going to a debate at a hall and sort of talking about it afterwards and saying, I agreed with this person or I agreed with this person, the immediate instinct is to choose a side and you say, I'm team this person or I'm team this person. And you feel like you're a warrior or you're a combatant and so people are much more heavily invested in it is something that I've noticed. And you see this particularly in politics with the kind of partisan thing. I'm not aligned to any party, so I tend to kind of skate lightly over it and don't take any of this stuff personally. But I think that a lot of people really do identify and get quite visceral with any kind of criticism of their party's policies.
We'll send me your emails and I'll try and read them out throughout the week. The panel at rnz.co.nz. But we give our final thoughts to our Monday afternoon series on the panel, highlighting small businesses that are New Zealand made and owned. We're going to handcrafted Kiwi rocking horses, not just horses, as we're about to find out. Shona Garvin is from the Rocking Horse Place from Whangarei. Shona, welcome to the panel.
Thank you.
Now, when did you first start making rocking horses?
Well, I've always wanted to make a rocking horse, and it was the right time to make one, and I didn't realise prior to that there were so many different rocking horses that need to be made. And, all of them are different. And, of course, as you alluded to, maybe you don't even need to make a rocking horse. It can be something else.
What a wonderful and what gave you the idea to do this as a business, a New Zealand-made business?
Well, I had to do something with the rocking horses. There's a limit to how many will fit in a house.
What are you've got the Palomino, the classic Kiwi. What are they made of? What sort of woods?
Well, we've got three ranges. We've got the classic Kiwi and the Palomino, and they're both made of plywood. They're cut out of sheets of ply. They're different shape designs is the difference between them. They both were designed by people in Northland, and they were businesses that I have acquired as I've been making horses, and people have wanted to retire. And I was previously making the timber horses, which are made out of timber. And so we make those ones out of swamp kauri because we're in Northland.
Swamp kauri, very special. Well, it's very nice to have you on.
Very special. It's our premium horse.
The Rocking Horse Place, Shona Garvin, Whangarei. Wonderful. Thanks for being with us. Nikki Pazant, Ben Thomas, I appreciate your time today.
Kia ora, Wallace.
I'm Wallace Chapman. Checkpoint next. See you tomorrow.
This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E Haere the Christchurch mosque gunman sacks his lawyers and will speak for himself at his sentencing next month. So what's to stop him using it as a platform for hate? The Serious Fraud Office launches an investigation into 2017 donations to the Labour Party. 30 deportees arriving here from Australia will isolate at an unnamed hotel in an unnamed city. Why all the secrecy? Speaking of Australia, there's 177 new COVID cases in Victoria today. The family of a man shot dead 2 decades ago take the police to court. 1 in 6 retailers are struggling to negotiate COVID rent relief, according to a new survey. And a random duck poisoning prompts warnings to pet owners in West Auckland.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata tēnei. The Serious Fraud Office is investigating donations made to the Labour Party in 2017. It's one of 4 investigations in relation to electoral funding matters currently underway. The office's director, Julie Reid, says it's making the announcement in the interests of transparency and consistency, and is consistent with other investigations. RNZ has contacted the Labour Party for comment. A survivor of the Al Noor Mosque shooting fears the gunman will use his sentencing as a platform for his hateful ideology. In March, Brenton Tarrant pleaded guilty to 51 counts of murder, 40 of attempted murder, and 1 charge under the Terrorism Suppression Act. He today fired his lawyers and opted to represent himself at sentencing next month. The Muslim Association of Canterbury General Secretary Feroz Dita, who still carries bullet fragments in his leg, says he fears the gunman will use his last public platform to spread hate speech.
There's every risk that this may happen, and I can see no other logical reason why he would have dismissed his lawyers representing him, other than paving the way for him to speak.
Feroz Dita. Tarrant will be sentenced on August the 24th. The mother of a man shot dead by the police has questioned the state of mind of the officer who fired the bullets. In 2000, Stephen Wallace walked down the main road of Waitara with a golf club and hit a patrol car with officers in it. Mr Wallace was shot dead by Senior Constable Keith Abbott, who was later acquitted of murder after the Wallace family took a private prosecution. Abbott had thought the man he killed was someone completely different, a neighbour, David Toa. The Wallace family has taken a civil claim against the police. At the High Court today, Stephen Wallace's mum, Raywin, questioned Mr Abbott's mindset.
If you were standing over the road and you were my neighbour, if you came within 10 metres from me, I would know what you looked like. Where was Constable Abbott's state of mind? I can fight this till the cows come home.
Raywin Wallace. A healthcare provider has been censured for failing to properly check on a frail elderly woman who died after suffering a heart attack and stroke at her home. The woman had multiple health problems and should have been checked on twice daily. Hamish Cardwell has more.
The Health and Disability Commissioner says the woman did not answer the door during repeated visits from support workers over 2 days in 2018. Calls to the house also went unanswered, and it was not until the second day a support worker finally got in using a neighbour's key. The woman had had a heart attack and a stroke and died shortly after being found. The Commissioner says the healthcare provider Access Community Health did not have proper procedures for checking on patients. Ko Hamish Cardwell, tēnei.
For the first time in more than a week, no new COVID-19 cases have been recorded in New Zealand. The last time the Ministry of Health confirmed 0 new infections was on July the 4th, 9 days ago. The country's 25 active cases were all caught at the border and remain there in quarantine facilities. No one is receiving hospital-level care for the virus. The government's contact tracing app has now recorded more than 500,000 registrations. National says the government needs to be more transparent about the security measures it's putting in place for deportees arriving from Australia. 30 deportees will arrive in Auckland on a charter flight this week. Health Minister Chris Hipkins says they will see out their 14-day isolation in a dedicated inner-city hotel, but he won't reveal the exact location. He says extra security will be in place as a precaution, including a greater police presence. But National's Defence spokesperson Mark Mitchell says the public deserves more details than that.
I think that they need to be much clearer on the measures that they're putting in place so that public can have a high level of confidence that these people are going to remain contained in their managed isolation. No, just throwing bodies at it's not enough. They need to have a clear plan.
Mark Mitchell. It's 5:04. The Warriors' hopes of having family members join them across the Tasman for the remainder of the National Rugby League hangs in the balance. The NRL's interim chief executive Andrew Abdo is meeting with the Warriors this afternoon, but has told 2GB Radio the exemptions have not yet been received. 4 players are considering returning to New Zealand for family reasons, having given the NRL a deadline of July 19th to organise the exemption from the New South Wales state government, which they promised the Warriors before leaving for Australia. Abdo says the NRL is in daily contact with the Warriors.
There's about 12 players that we're unable to bring their families across, and that's because we can't get the exemption we need. And some of the players have personal circumstances which are causing strain. We've looked at other ways in which we can support the squad up in Terrigal. I'm going up to see them, and we'll continue to work with them.
Acting NRL boss Andrew Abdo. Scott Dixon's perfect start to the IndyCar season has come to an end, finishing 12th in the second race of the Wisconsin doubleheader. Dixon, who had won the first 3 races of the season, still holds a 54-point lead in the championship. Relegation threatened Bournemouth and Aston Villa have scored crucial English Premier League football wins. Third to bottom Bournemouth beat the fourth placed Leicester 4-1 and second to bottom Aston Villa beat Crystal Palace 3-1. Spurs beat Arsenal 2-1 in the North London derby. That's the news.
The minor parties kick off.
Ladies and gentlemen, go wild and crazy and please welcome David Seymour.
As ACT digs deep.
It's our most expensive campaign since 2005, but also our most expensive. There will be no change out of $1 million.
And the Greens aim for low carbon.
Installing solar and batteries is actually quite a job-rich environment. You create a multiple win where you're tackling climate change, you're creating jobs, you're lowering household electricity bills.
Leading the charge. Morning Report, weekdays from 6, on air and online.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula, fine spells and isolated showers. Areas of fog tomorrow morning. Waikato to Taranaki, including central high country, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Scattered rain, easing to patchy drizzle tonight. Low cloud morning and night. Whanganui to Wellington, also Wairarapa, Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury. Fine or becoming fine tonight. Bulla, Westland, Fiordland and Otago except Clutha. Mainly fine. Areas of morning fog in many valleys, isolated showers in Bulla until tomorrow afternoon. For Southland and Clutha, fine apart from some cloudy periods and showers near the coast. And Chatham Islands, a few showers. RNZ National, it's coming up to 7 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna, and welcome to Checkpoint. Tonight, the Christchurch mosque gunman sacks his lawyers and opts to represent himself at sentencing next month. And Australia resumes the deportation of New Zealanders after a temporary halt due to COVID-19. But first to some breaking news. The Serious Fraud Office has launched an investigation in relation to donations made to the Labour Party in 2017. In a statement which was released in the past hour, the SFO says it was conducting 4 investigations in relation to electoral funding, and a 5th was now before the courts. Now, joining me now to discuss this is Otago University law professor Andrew Geddes. Andrew, a really short, sharp statement from the SFO. What do we know about this investigation and what may have prompted it?
All we know is what the Serious Fraud Office has said in its statement. It's basically following past convention. So when it's launched these investigations and the other episodes that it discusses, it's told the world we are doing this. So they've said, look, because we told the world in those past times we did it, we're doing it now. They don't say actually anything in their statement as to what the investigation is directly into yet.
So, is there any clues to whether it's related to any of the existing cases?
Well, we can maybe surmise a little bit, and we have to be very careful that we're surmising, so we're drawing from possibilities. 2 of the investigations that the Serious Fraud Office has running are into Leanne Dalziel and Phil Goff, ex-Labour Party cabinet ministers, in relation to how they raised money or got donations for their local body campaigns for the Mayor of Auckland and the Mayor of Christchurch respectively. And what the Serious Fraud Office is looking at with regard to those donations is the way that auctions were used to disguise the identity of donors to those 2 candidates. So items would be auctioned, allegedly at an inflated value, and the identity of who had bid on those things was not made clear, so you never got to see who actually paid the money for the items. Now, this is a tactic that the Labour Party itself has used at the national level and was using in 2017. And there have been questions raised as to whether the Labour Party's technique at those auctions was strictly in compliance with the Electoral Act. So it may well be that what the Serious Fraud Office is looking at is the way that the Labour Party used this tactic, given that it's already looking at how 2 ex-Labour Party cabinet ministers used that tactic.
Understood. So let's just look at this a little bit more. In an auction situation, you're given an item from someone, usually, to raise money. So first of all, you've got the donor who's given you the item, and then you have the purchaser. What are the obligations in terms of declaring both the person who's given you the item to auction and the person who pays for it?
Well, the question in this situation is who is the donor of value? So there's the item that's given, which is worth something. And the way it ought to work is whoever gives the item that's worth something is the donor of that something. And then if someone bids more than that worth, then they're the donor of the extra value above and beyond its worth. The problem is when you get to things like artwork, which has no inherent value. I mean, what is a painting worth? And what it appears the Labour Party did was, if they were given an artwork that sold for a certain amount at auction, they would say that the person who created the artwork was the donor of the full value, even if someone had bid what seems to be quite a large amount of money more than the painting would usually sell for. And so what the Serious Fraud Office may be looking at, and this is speculation, we don't know for sure, is whether or not that was correctly reported, whether the Labour Party ought to have been reporting who was buying the thing for the extra amount above and beyond what it would sell for in your local gallery. Because if they haven't done that, then they may well have falsely reported their donations to the Electoral Commission, which is an offence.
So, to be clear, if you donate something, you're named as the donor. If that thing sells for more than what is considered market value, then there is a second donor that should be named for contributing that part of it. Without getting too complicated, there is a cap on what you can donate anonymously, right? So does it matter if the added value of that item is less than the disclosure cap, if you see what I'm saying?
Quite. So if the added value of the item is less than $15,000, it doesn't need to be declared. So in other words, I give a book to auction. The book is only worth $50, but someone buys it for $10,000. Well, the $9,950 extra value doesn't have to be declared publicly because it's less than $15,000. But what can happen is that someone buys things at an auction over multiple items. So when you add all that extra value together, it becomes above $15,000 and so should be declared. And it's not clear whether that sort of thing was happening in these circumstances. All of this, of course, again, we have to say is just speculation, but it may be the thing that's attracted the Serious Fraud Office's attention.
Okay, so they're looking at the letter of the law, right? Mm-hmm. What about the ethical obligation here? In your view, in terms of transparency, what should be the situation? Because as you say, who knows really what the real value of a piece of art or an item that is donated is?
Yeah, I mean, this is an area that I think has been used as a, quite a convenient way to basically hide the identity of donors for quite a while. The Electoral Commission has apparently signed off on this and said that, look, they regard this as being okay. Now, whether the Electoral Commission knows the full extent to which this has been used, we don't know, because the Electoral Commission only knows what the parties tell them. And, of course, the Electoral Commission isn't the final arbiter of what the law is in this area. If the Serious Fraud Office disagrees with the Electoral Commission, it can take its own independent action. But frankly, I think this is an area that really does need tightened up on quite considerably because, I mean, there's no doubt that what we really need to be interested in is not an artist who's giving a painting to the Labour Party, but who is paying tens of thousands of dollars for that painting, because that's the money that the party is then using. And if we don't know that, then we don't know who is giving the financial cash that the parties are using to run their campaigns.
So these investigations seem to be coming pretty thick and fast at the moment. What do you make of that?
Well, again, the Electoral Commission, which has the oversight of this area, is not an investigative body. So all it does is it receives the returns that parties send to it and takes them at face value. And it can only look at an issue if someone raises it with them, and then it can only ask the parties for information. It's got no ability to actually dig into behind the parties' records and look to see whether they're accurate. The Serious Fraud Office, having been involved first with the Jamie Lee Ross and national donations, and then with other donations afterwards, actually has the capacity to go and look in an investigative manner at what is going on. And it appears once you actually start digging into the practices, there seem to be problems. And at the minute, we've got, only 2 of our parties are not under direct investigation by the Serious Fraud Office, which I don't think is something that anyone would have thought that, would be the case in New Zealand.
And we've got an election looming. So what difficulties does that pose? Because Given the time that this takes, we're unlikely to get resolutions before people have to choose who they're backing at the ballot box.
I mean, I think it's very likely that we'll go into the September election with an ongoing investigation by the Serious Fraud Office into the Labour Party, and they're going to have to live with that as a political fact.
Appreciate your time this evening. That is Andrew Geddes, who's a Otago University law professor, speaking there about the fact that the Serious Fraud Office has launched yet another investigation into political donations. In this case, it's in relation to donations made to the Labour Party in 2017. Mass murderer Brenton Tarrant will speak for himself at his sentencing next month after sacking his lawyers, raising concerns it may be difficult to control what he says in court. But a leading criminal barrister says there are tight legal constraints on what the mosque gunman can speak to at sentencing and also on his access to victim statements. In March, the 29-year-old pleaded guilty to 51 charges of murder, 40 of attempted murder and 1 charge under the Terrorism Suppression Act relating to the attacks at the Al Noor and Linwood mosques. Marie Dyberg says it's his legal right to represent himself despite what people may think of his crimes.
When somebody is represented at sentencing, they don't speak because they have counsel. In his case, of course, an intervener is not his counsel, so I can anticipate he will be allowed to speak. But a judge will be ensuring that whatever is said is within the bounds of what is appropriate for sentencing.
That is an interesting scenario, isn't it? Because once someone opens their mouth and says something, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. So quite difficult to control, isn't it?
You can jump pretty quickly where you can silence someone. Now, the general feeling is that sentencing is so important to anybody facing the court and access to justice that sentencing, the default position is you are there in person. But it may be that there are different considerations here and that the sentencing may take place with the defendant remotely and, of course, in effect being on camera. That is something a judge may decide. The defendant will be allowed to argue against that because, of course, they must have a view, and the Crown will have a view as well. But that is one potential way of keeping somebody under control. It's a very big step to deny a defendant access to the public courtroom.
So in the courtroom then, would you anticipate, because when lawyers make submissions at sentencing, they're standing up, they're in the body of the court, where would he be?
One would think logistically for security reasons, and just for any defendant, they must, of course, be with a security guard, whether they pose a real problem or not, that they would set up, I would imagine, the dock where the person would have the desk available, would have the microphone available, and, of course, can see and hear the judge and the Crown. Or they may have a separate box set up so that he could be in the court, but he certainly, nobody, even lawyers, certainly no one in the court is allowed to just simply walk around the court. But he will be entitled to see and hear the judge and the Crown at all times.
And victim statements. In cases like these, victims can make victim impact statements to the court. Will he get access to that sensitive information?
Yes, he will, and he must. But already, just in the general body of law, there are very, very strict rules around the use of victim impact statements. And how it works just generally at the moment, say myself as counsel, I receive a copy of a victim impact statement from the Crown. I do that on the undertaking I will not copy it. I will not give it to anyone else. I will not let anybody else look at it or be within hearing unless they are the defendant, perhaps a court-appointed interpreter, perhaps, And that is all. I then either sit with the defendant, hand the victim impact statement over, the defendant reads it, I take it back. At the end of the hearing, I hand it back to the Crown and they take it back into their custody. Or I will read the victim impact statement out to the client. Sometimes clients don't want to listen, they don't want to hear, but at least they've been given the opportunity. He will not get it directly because no defendant will receive it directly, even if you are self-represented. There are ways and procedures in place where they do not have that control over a victim impact statement.
How does the court manage the situation whereby an individual like this may get some satisfaction or glee from involving himself in the proceedings along with victims?
There are always going to be people who want to do that. There are going to be defendants generally who want to go all the way, who want people to have to read statements at court that should be accepted as evidence, and you cannot control that because the system says you're entitled to that. There'll be a lot of logistics that will need to be considered in terms of who can access the court, members of the public, because, of course, the public arena is not huge in any courtroom in New Zealand, all sorts of identification, how submissions are presented, how people are kept under control, and that's for everybody in the court so that the decorum of the court is maintained. And there will be plans, if I sound a bit flippant, plan A, plan B, plan C, they'll all be in place and ready to be put into effect should certain things happen. It will be a very well prepared sentencing with all potential circumstances taken into account and what the response will be.
What are the options for sentencing? Because there would be, no case that is directly comparable, and the number of people that have been killed here, and obviously attempted murder, 51 murder charges, 40 attempted murder and a terrorism charge. What is the potential scope? Is there an upper cap on the sentence that this man could get?
No. And there is a misconception, unfortunately, where people read in the paper that, oh yes, that somebody's got 13 years or 15 years. When somebody's convicted of murder, they are sentenced to life imprisonment, and it means just that. You are in prison for life. Where the numbers come into play is that there is then the option of having a minimum parole sentence put in place, and you cannot apply for parole before that time is up. In New Zealand, unless there are extreme circumstances and there is a lesser period of minimum non-parole, anybody convicted of murder, they have a minimum non-parole of 10 years. You cannot apply for parole until your 10 years is up. And then in other circumstances, that term can be increased. So what you read when you read figures, it is to do with parole only. This person has pleaded guilty to murder, has been convicted of it a number of times, but anybody who is convicted of life imprisonment murder gets life imprisonment, and it means that you can stay there for your life.
Marie, in terms of managing people coming into the court, because there is a right to come and watch proceedings, how do you manage those coming to support the victims and perhaps those coming to support the person who's being sentenced, who may even sympathise with his views in this case?
I would anticipate that you would have the courtroom, and it may well be that those in the actual courtroom will be those who are given some sort of priority for either side. There will then be other courtrooms I can anticipate that will be set up with audio-visual facilities so that members of the public or support people can be in other courtrooms. They can watch the proceedings, but they're not actually in that main courtroom. So I can anticipate that. Then whether or not there is something outside the courtroom that's set up for people to watch, that I don't know. Of course, the media will be there and they'll be able to film the proceedings themselves. But this is a sentencing that has to go smoothly for everybody, not just the defendant himself and his supporters, if there are any, but for everybody involved. So there will be a lot of steps taken to ensure when there is a very unpopular defendant, that person exercises all the rights they're entitled to. And it's easy to say, well, they did this, they don't really deserve the weight of the law. Well, of course they do.
And that was criminal lawyer Marie Dyberg. It is 26 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. As always, we're keen to hear your views. Get in touch about anything you hear on the program this evening. What do you make of the fact that the Christchurch gunman is going to represent himself at sentencing? And also, what you think about political donations. The SFO has announced that it is investigating the Labour Party now for donations in 2017. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. After a temporary halt due to COVID-19, Australia will resume the deportation of New Zealanders this week, with a group of 30 arriving to Auckland on a chartered flight. They will carry out their 14 days isolation in a dedicated inner-city hotel. But the Health Minister isn't giving any further details about their location, citing their privacy and concerns about vigilante activity. But National says the government needs to be more transparent if it wants people to have confidence in the security measures it's putting in place. Here's political reporter Yvette McCullough.
It's a policy the Prime Minister has repeatedly described as corrosive to trans-Tasman relations. Its resumption comes at a time when the government is stemming the flow of New Zealanders coming home. Health Minister Chris Hipkins says while the government doesn't have to like that deportations are restarting, it does have to lump it.
We firmly believe that these are Australia's problems, not New Zealand's problems. They are, however, within their legal right to do what they are doing.
The deportees will see out their managed isolation in an inner-city hotel, but the government is keeping the exact location secret. Mr Hipkins says they're entitled to their privacy, and he's concerned about the potential for vigilante action.
We have seen evidence of where people have been named. They have become a target for bullying and their families as well. And I think we just all have to take a bit of a breath here. People should leave these matters to the process of law and not take matters into their own hands.
Mr Hipkins wouldn't say whether this group is considered high-risk offenders, but said extra security would be in place as a precaution. He said this would involve extra police and defence personnel.
I don't want to go into all of the ins and outs of the individual security planning, because to some extent it might defeat the purpose of doing it. But there has been a very rigorous process of preparing for the arrival of this particular cohort.
But National's Defence spokesperson Mark Mitchell says the government needs to be more forthcoming. He says given the spate of escapees at facilities last week, the public needs to have confidence the government has this under control.
I think that they need to be much clearer on the measures that they're putting in place so that public can have a high level of confidence that these people are going to remain contained in their managed isolation. No, just throwing bodies at it's not enough. They need to have a clear plan.
Mr Mitchell says although he can see the argument for keeping the location secret, the public deserves to have more details about security measures.
We just can't afford to keep having breaches because we're whistling in the grave eventually. Someone that's positive will get out, and the last thing we need is another community outbreak of COVID-19.
The Minister in charge of isolation and quarantine facilities, Megan Woods, says the security risks are being appropriately managed and will be adjusted in future if necessary.
If there was an individual assessment that said there needed to be more security, then yes, there would be more security. But bear in mind how much security, when you're talking about a cohort of only 30-odd people, is actually quite a lot of security.
Ms Wood says these deportees have the same rights as any other New Zealander coming home.
These are people that will behave like most people in managed isolation. They're not setting out to break the rules. We have had some very high-profile instances of people absconding, but that's 4 out of nearly 30,000.
Chris Hipkins says this week's arrivals will serve as a trial run, and Australia has given assurances that it won't send any more until all the logistics and security issues are completely ironed out. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Yvette McCullough.
Checkpoint did ask Health Minister Chris Hipkins on the programme this evening. He declined our invitation. Megan Woods, the Minister for Isolation Quarantine, wasn't available to talk to us either. Air Commodore Digby Webb, well, he didn't want to speak to us either on this topic. We also invited police on the programme. Chris Hipkins said they'd been heavily involved in the planning for the return of these deportees. No, they didn't want to come on the programme either. We also extended an invitation to the Corrections Minister Kelvin Davis to be interviewed on the programme this evening. He was a no too. Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, the family of a man shot dead 2 decades ago takes the police to court. Retailers struggling to make rent are desperate for the government-assisted arbitration to get going and fast. And the poisoning of a flock of ducks prompts a warning to West Auckland pet owners. Now, we'd love your feedback on anything you've heard on the programme this evening. Get in touch about political donations. What do you make about when you do and don't have to declare them? Also, your views on the deportees. Should we be told where they're going into isolation? You can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time for the headlines now, though, with Susanna.
Donations made to the Labour Party in 2017 are being investigated by the Serious Fraud Office. Otago University law professor Andrew Geddes told Checkpoint it could be connected to tactics the party used to make money through auctions. It's one of 4 investigations in relation to electoral funding matters currently underway. A criminal barrister expects the Christchurch mosque gunman will be permitted to speak at his sentencing after waiving his right to a lawyer. Marie Dyberg told the programme Brenton Tarrant has the right to represent himself, but a judge has options to control what he says in court. The mother of Stephen Wallace, who was shot dead by police 20 years ago in Waitara, is questioning the state of mind of the constable who pulled the trigger. The family has taken a civil claim against the police. Raywin Wallace says it doesn't make sense that Constable Abbott had thought the man he killed was someone completely different. A healthcare provider has been censured for failing to properly check on a frail elderly woman who died after suffering a heart attack and stroke at her home in 2018. The Health and Disability Commissioner says Access Community Health did not have proper procedures for checking on patients. The head of the Property Council says a number of tenants and landlords are stuck in limbo, awaiting government support to settle disputes. A fund was announced in June to help business owners negotiate rent and lease conditions, but none of the money has been spent. National says the public deserves to know more about the security measures in place for deportees arriving from Australia. 30 deportees will arrive in Auckland on a charter flight this week, but the Health Minister won't reveal the exact location of their 14-day isolation. Extra security will be in place as a precaution. The Ministry of Health has recorded no new coronavirus infections for the first time in 9 days. The country's 25 active cases remain in quarantine facilities at the border. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen, and it's time now for the business news with Nona Peltier. Nona, you want to talk about the appetite for premium meat. What do we class as premium meat?
Well, top cuts of meat, like, say, a fillet or,
We're not talking beef cheeks here.
Well, I don't know. Beef cheeks could be potentially premium. I guess it depends on how your cooking is going. But no, we're talking about things like, like a rump roast would probably be a lower cut. And so basically think this way. I mean, if you go along to the takeaway, the burger you get is probably not a premium meat, but the one you might have in a 5-star restaurant would be. And since overseas people are not being able to go to these 5-star restaurants, so burger is probably the best they're getting. And New Zealand likes has to market itself on its premium product. So this has been so the old meat in the sandwich kind of thing. New Zealand has been hit by a drought on one end, and on the other side is the COVID. So if they're having indigestion, it's not any wonder, and I'll tell you why. Because the costs, the prices that they're fetching. So normally you'd have a decline at this time of year, and what they have seen is it's twice as harsh as they would have normally expected for a downturn. So whereas the prices might have dropped by in the off-season, say $1.10, they've actually gone $2.50 down for lamb. And when it comes to beef, it's 65 cents is a normal drop that they would expect to see in an off-season, but it's down $1.50. This makes a really big difference to profit margins and so on. So yeah, it's been very difficult for the meat sector.
And so, as you say, this is because in part of closures, we market a lot of this overseas, closures, shutdowns of restaurants and people's ability to go out and socialise and buy our top meat.
Exactly. So that's been a big factor. And of course, there's other constraints with supply and so on. Yeah, it's been a really difficult time for the sector.
So it may be an ongoing issue as well.
It could very well be. So, there you go.
Not good news. All right, deflationary pressure. Now, that's a mouthful to get out. Deflationary pressure.
Trying to explain it is even worse.
Okay. On your marks, get set, and go.
Okay.
So, what have you got?
So on Thursday, we're going to have the new CPI figures. And it's going to be about inflation. Now, normally we say inflation meaning something rose. Makes sense, right? Now we're talking about deflation, something falls. So the prices have there's going to be deflation expected in this quarter that's coming up.
So this is the consumer price index we're talking about?
That's right. So prices consumers pay are expected to have, according to the Reserve Bank, dropped 0.7%. That's deflation.
Right. And just so people know, this is the basket of goods, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah. Goods and services that we, consumers
commonly purchase, and that they're checked on a regular basis to see whether they're up and down in terms of prices.
And it's going to surprise a lot of people, but one of the reasons for the drop is the fuel war. The oil price war we had earlier over the COVID lockdown. There was the double thing, which we had the Saudi at war with Russia over prices. Well, that spilled down into our inflation prices, and that's one of the reasons why prices have dropped so much. So that's where the deflation is coming from.
Okay, that's interesting, because anyone who's been to the supermarket will know it's not the price of a courgette that's causing things to drop.
It certainly isn't the price of a courgette today.
All
no,
right.
indeed. And actually, so we're looking at inflation on an annual basis of perhaps 1.3%. This is the Reserve Bank's forecast. In fact, economists think it's going to be worse than that. It's going to be weaker inflation. This means that the Reserve Bank is unlikely to raise interest rates anytime soon, and it's more likely to continue to ease monetary policy to ensure that we don't fall too deep down into the hole. Because come the 2021, we're expecting this deflation to continue, and we're going to see these negative numbers for some time. And let's hope we don't see them forever.
What has been happening on the markets too today, Nona?
Well, we closed up about 0.33%, 40 points to 11,435. And that's really because we're seeing some positive sentiment in Asia, with most people expecting the U.S. earnings season to deliver some good profit growth. The New Zealand dollar is at 65.8 US cents and steady at 94.5 cents Australian, 52 British pence.
Thanks, Nona. Nona Peltier with our business news. And where are we moving to next? Let's see. 1 in 6 retail businesses are struggling to negotiate rent relief and want government-assisted arbitration to help them resolve their plight. The survey done by Retail New Zealand also shows some business owners are being threatened with having guarantees called in and eviction. Meanwhile, the government is being accused of playing politics as measures announced in June to assist tenants and landlords come to terms over rents and leases have still not come into effect. Harry Locke reports.
Carnage and unemployment is how Julie White of Hospitality New Zealand foresees the next few months ahead. That's if no new measures are introduced to help business owners negotiate new terms with their landlords.
We're just hoping that something's going to be announced sooner rather than later, because there's going to be carnage. Carnage is going to come, and it's going to be closures, it's going to be employment, and that's a real concern.
A plan was announced in June, a fund which businesses could apply for and receive up to $6,000 to cover arbitration fees. over a month and a bit later, not a single dollar has been spent. The Minister of Justice, Andrew Little, says it's disappointing no consensus has been reached within Cabinet. The disagreement is between coalition partners New Zealand First and Labour. While they agreed on the terms in early June, it never made it into Parliament. It was pulled, as the leader of New Zealand First, Winston Peters, said the terms of the legislation didn't match up to the terms of the agreement. That has still not been resolved within Cabinet. But at the same time, the head of Retail New Zealand, Greg Harford, says the issue is only becoming more pressing.
We've heard of some businesses that have been threatened with both having guarantees called in through their banks and indeed being evicted. They're not large numbers, but those threats are definitely there.
Andrew Little says he hopes an agreement on the fund will be finalised in the coming weeks. New Zealand First refused a request for comment. Hospitality NZ's Julie White says the delay is frustrating.
We're of the understanding that Minister Little was very keen to help out, but things have got delayed, and it's our understanding that this is politics. And again, we urge all parties, this isn't the time to play politics, this is the time to step up.
The head of the Property Council, which represents commercial landlords Leonie Freeman, says the uncertainty means both landlords and tenants are stuck in limbo.
It's not clear on who is included. It's not clear on, what the basis of the agreement is. It's not totally clear whether, if you've already made an agreement, whether it has an opportunity to be relitigated. So I suppose it just means that some of the small tenants and small landlords are just waiting.
She says she doesn't know what to expect from the new legislation as she hasn't been consulted on it. While the government remains in a deadlock, there is concern that for some industries, arbitration is no longer the answer. A survey of tourism businesses around the country found 38% still need financial assistance for fixed costs, such as rents and leases. The chief executive of Tourism Industry Aotearoa, Chris Roberts, says they need money, not arbitration with their landlords.
Even with a reduction in the rent, it may still be difficult for that tenant to survive. And of course, the landlord also has the right to get a return on their investment. So it's not just a matter of arbitration. There's also a very good case for direct government support for those businesses to make sure they're still viable.
Meanwhile, business owners are worried things will get even worse for them and their staff when the wage subsidy runs out on September 1st. For Checkpoint, Harry Locke.
Now, in breaking news, we just have a statement, and that's further to the SFO investigation into donations to the Labour Party in 2017. This statement has come from the Labour Party. It says, "We have not been advised of the specifics of the inquiry. However, the Labour Party will fully cooperate with any SFO investigations. For completeness, however, we note that we have already made statements to media in February confirming that 2 men who were then being investigated by the SFO and had made donations to the National Party had also made donations to Labour." And it goes on to say, "We won't be issuing any further statement while the investigation is underway," but they do provide some background which discusses the fact that these 2 donors purchased art at a auction, and it says that they were included in the donations by way of the auction, were included in the party return that was filed that year. So a piece of art was purchased at a silent auction in March of 2017, and it was included as a donation within the party return that was filed that year. So that is again in relation to the SFO just announcing today, this afternoon, that it is investigating the Labour Party and donations that were made to the party in 2017. The family of a man shot dead in Taranaki 2 decades ago say they are looking for justice as they take a civil case against the police. In April 2000, Stephen Wallace used a golf club to smash the windows of a police car which officers were sitting in. He was fatally shot by one officer who has since been acquitted, but the Wallace family says his actions went too far. Jonathan Mitchell has more.
In the early hours of April 30th, 2000, Stephen Wallace walked down Waitara's main street with a golf club, smashing shop windows, a taxi and then a police car with officers in it. The 23-year-old was shot dead by Senior Constable Keith Abbott, and his cause of death was a fatal wound to his liver. A report into his death confirmed that even if first aid had been given immediately after he was shot, Mr Wallace would not have survived. In 2002, Keith Abbott was acquitted of murder after the Wallace family took a private prosecution against him. The family still believes there were other tactical options available to the police the night Stephen Wallace died, and he was deprived of the right to life. At the High Court in Wellington late this afternoon, Mr Wallace's mother, Raywin, took the stand and broke down, saying the private prosecution broke the family. When questioned by Crown lawyer Peter Gunn, she got upset when describing an early report into the incident.
Because it was a police investigation into themselves, not a proper investigation.
Right. So you thought that somebody should be prosecuted?
It should have been investigated properly, not by his best friend.
Earlier in the day, a lawyer representing the Wallace family, Graham Minchin, said the police officer's actions went too far.
He was acting unreasonably because he was breaching the police instructions as to how to deal with that situation.
He said the officer had a case of mistaken identity and thought Mr Wallace was actually another person, David Tower, despite Tower being a lot older. In any case, Mr Minchin said the gun shouldn't have been fired.
Well, he could have clocked him from behind. So what we're saying is the arrest could have been made. We're not saying that Stephen Wallace wasn't a problem. We're not saying that he didn't warrant getting clocked or dealt to and arrested. We're just saying he shouldn't have been shot.
However, Crown lawyer Peter Gunn said the police officer feared for his life.
Stephen Wallace presented a very real danger of either death or serious bodily injury at the time of the incident.
Mr Gunn said the officers had to make swift decisions and pepper spray was not an option. The case before Justice Ellis is set down for a week. At the High Court in Wellington for Checkpoint, called Jonathan Mitchell-Aho.
Across the ditch now, where Victoria has recorded another 177 cases of the coronavirus in the last day. It's the lowest daily number of new infections for several days, but health officials are warning people they can't afford to become complacent. Our World Watch reporter Annabelle Reid has more.
It's the first time in 3 days Victoria's recorded fewer than 200 new cases of COVID-19. In a state desperate for some good news in the fight against the coronavirus, this was it. But authorities tempered it with a warning.
I think I've always been calm in these presses, but I have never been complacent. I'm not going to be complacent about today's number. It's great that it's lower than our peak, but it may not be our peak yet.
The state's Chief Health Officer, Brett Sutton, says Victoria's recording 4 or 5 new outbreaks a day, including at a supermarket, a butcher's, and 26 cases at an aged care facility.
That's a big aged care outbreak. A number of staff and a number of residents have become infected in that outbreak, but that's being very intensively managed at the moment.
There are also more than 20 cases linked to 3 separate hospitals. State authorities say they don't want doctors and nurses to be the last line of defence, but Melbourne GP Markesh Haikawal says doctors are doing it tough.
I, as a doctor on the front line, am finding it incredibly difficult to work in this space, and so are my colleagues doing the same sort of work. My other colleagues who are in general practice asking to give patients guidance have not got the guidance to do that.
The state's Premier, Daniel Andrews, has thanked those following the lockdown rules, which he says is helping authorities get a lid on the outbreak.
This lockdown will continue for as long as it needs to, but it need not be there for a moment longer than is absolutely necessary if everybody simply follows the rules.
However, in the past 24 hours, Victoria Police handed out 133 fines to people breaching the rules. Daniel Andrews says police are taking a tough line on rule breakers.
Last time they issued many more warnings than fines. They're not mucking about. The time for warnings is over. They'll always use good judgment, fair judgment. But if you are out there just breaking the rules and you're betting that you won't get caught, the odds are not good. You will get caught. And you will be fined.
While the state is racing to contain the coronavirus, attention north of the border has turned to the race that stops a nation. The New South Wales Deputy Premier has offered to take the Melbourne Cup off Victoria's hands, a discussion Mr Andrews doesn't want a bar of.
How very kind of him. I haven't got time for those really silly games, and that's what they are. We're all in this together, and they're doing a lot of contact tracing up in Sydney at the moment. They've got an issue. We've got a much bigger issue, and we're focused on dealing with that.
And New South Wales does have its own issue to manage, an outbreak linked to a pub in Sydney's southwest. 13 cases have now been confirmed and 12 Australian Defence Force personnel are in isolation because they stopped in at the Crossroads Hotel in recent days. Meanwhile, the Premier, Gladys Berejiklian, has announced returning Australians will soon be charged $3,000 for their hotel quarantine.
The vast majority of people returning are choosing to do so at their own time, and we don't think that's fair that the taxpayers should continue that burden. But more than anything else, this is about telling everybody that we want our absolute focus to be on clamping down on community transmission in New South Wales. That's where we're at.
New South Wales joining Queensland in adding a charge for the pleasure of returning home. For Checkpoint, Annabelle Reid.
To the US now, and the Sunshine State has become a hotbed of COVID-19 infections. Florida has registered a record 15,300 cases in a single day. It equates to a quarter of all daily infections in the US, in a state with just 7% of the country's population. The US is the worst affected country in the world, with another 66,000 infections reported on Saturday. As the BBC's Peter Bowes reports, the situation in the US is getting worse by the day.
Another surge in coronavirus cases and the new epicentre for the disease. Florida is now seeing more new infections than most countries. Across the US, more than 60,000 new cases are being reported every day, and about a quarter of them are in the Sunshine State, where the hospital system is under growing strain and some intensive care facilities are at full capacity. When the pandemic started, Florida was slow to respond. The beaches and bars stayed open. They were eventually forced to close, but reopened early, only to be shut down again. This is a state dogged by the disease and confusion over how to deal with it. Even as the numbers rose over the weekend, Disney World opened again to the public, Mickey Mouse at a distance, and mandatory face masks for visitors. But the Republican governor, Ron DeSantis, has refused to issue a statewide order for people to cover their faces. There are some anti-mask activists who believe it's not necessary at all.
The risks are very, very low. This is a virus that has a 99.6% recovery rate. This is a virus that is very well contained.
With other states like Arizona, Texas and California all facing worrying increases in the number of new cases, the Trump administration is focusing on reopening schools in the autumn, despite opposition.
I think everybody would like to get our kids back to school as quickly as we can, but we also want to do it and make sure that our kids are going to be as safe as possible. So we're not going to be rushed into this.
With a growing health crisis, a divided nation and a presidential election looming, the politics of dealing with COVID-19 has never been more intense.
It is 8 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We're keen for your feedback. Do get in touch. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. West Auckland pet owners are being warned to watch out for signs of poisoning in their animals after a flock of stupefied mallard ducks apparently dropped out of the sky in West Auckland. Fish and Game say the 8 ducks had to be euthanised after they were discovered near death on a street in Glen Eden. And a post-mortem showed that ingested wheat laced with a pest control product called alpha chlorelose. John Dyer from Fish and Game says while the poison is approved for use in some cases, users aren't registered, so it's difficult to track the product back. But it's up to people using it to make sure they don't accidentally poison other animals.
8 mallard ducks were found in a sort of a near-dead state in an urban area of Glen Eden, and they were picked up by a SPCA ranger and taken to a nearby vet. They were too far gone and had to be euthanised. I received a complaint about that, so I went and collected some of the ducks and did an autopsy or necropsy on them and discovered wheat in their gizzards, which is pretty consistent with being poisoned by a product called alpha chlorelose, which anyone can buy over the counter. It has the effect that we saw, which is kind of stupefying the birds that eat it.
This poison, what would you normally use it for?
It comes either as a treated wheat or paste, and it's normally used for controlling nuisance birds like sparrows. The polymers, mallard ducks and pukekes and various other birds that are affected by it, they're protected by law, even though they're game birds. You just can't go around poisoning them, either through negligence or being deliberately reckless or so on.
This was a public park, though, in Glen Eden, right? So would you anticipate a scenario where it would legitimately be used in an area like that, where, as you point out, other animals could be exposed to it?
I mean, this has been happening around the country. It's been happening to a whole variety of birds in a whole variety of situations, and in some cases people have assumed that it's the local authorities doing it. And there have been some quite nasty, feedback, if you like. But in actual fact, it turned out not to be the case at all. So you have to be a little careful about assuming who might have done it and why, unless you can, get quite specific. One of the problems is there's no point of sale registration. Anyone can just walk in, buy it, walk out, and use it however they wish. And it was suggested by the Bird Recovery Centre in Rongorai, for instance, suggested that if there was a point of sale register, it might encourage people to be a lot more careful. It would be an opportunity to give them advice. It would also facilitate any follow-up investigations to try and get to the bottom of who's doing this.
You mentioned that you can buy this just over the counter and you don't have to put your name down. Are you campaigning for that situation to change?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, it's a possibility. Under the Wildlife Act, there's potential to introduce those sort of controls, and I think that's something that should receive some debate. But we're not necessarily, I'm exploring that possibility. I'm only just coming to terms with what's happened. But certainly we've had people in other instances have used, they've gone through their poisons shed, found some stuff they thought would be good to mix up, killed the local birds that were stealing their plums or their apples or whatever it was. And, fallout is kind of the appropriate word. Birds were falling out of the sky and dying on neighbours' places all over the place. And, of course, there's a secondary risk to pets. Now, that's quite illegal to use a product contrary to label, and there are some extremely serious fines involved in that.
So for pet owners, can you just give us an idea, what symptoms should they watch out for?
So if someone was poisoning sparrows or something of the sort, and your dog or your cat ate, there's a dopey sparrow, I'll help myself to that. They would become very lethargic. They'd want to sleep in silence. But this thing works like hypothermia. It actually lowers their body temperature, and if you take them to a warm spot, give them a nice warm blanket, consult a vet, pretty quickly, just to try and get to the bottom of what it is. They might have eaten chocolate or something, for instance.
Is something more happening with this? Is there any further investigation, and is there any further risk to other ducks that may be in this park?
Well, I think the risk is to a whole variety of birds, from what I gather, all sorts of garden birds, all sort of urban birds you might find, and it can be used anywhere in the countryside as well. So, and I guess as long as they have a packet of this stuff and carry on using it, there's always the risk it's going to happen again.
And that is John Dyer from Fish and Game there. A lot of you are getting in touch about the SFO investigation, the announcement today from the Serious Fraud Office that it is investigating donations made to Labor in 2017. This from Len. Has the Serious Fraud Office taken a leaf out of the FBI playbook? With a general election looming, they have mysteriously brought up a 3-year-old investigation into Labor Party fundraising in auction, just like the FBI announced a reopening of an investigation into Hillary Clinton just before the US presidential election. All the parties in New Zealand use similar fundraising techniques, and several, including the National Party, are being investigated. Strange that Labor is brought to public notice at this time. Len, the SFO says in its press statement that it is announcing the investigation into Labor's donation as it has announced all others as well. So it announced the investigation into Nationals donations and to the 2 mayoral candidates as well, Leanne Dalzell and Phil Goff. So it actually makes the specific comment that in the interests of transparency and consistency, the SFO has announced the commencement of all of these investigations. And Steve from Wellington says SFO announcing an investigation into Labour Party donations this close to the election smacks of Comey reinvestigating Hillary Clinton just before the US presidential election. And it says the SFO has had 3 years to get its ducks in a row. I think that was only referred because it's the Electoral Commission who deals with it first, Steve. They refer it to the SFO and then the SFO decides whether to investigate or not. So it is a bit of a process. Ken says, I can imagine on hearing the news of the SFO thing, the opposition will be leaping around like the Energizer Bunny on a bungee. On the subject of deportees, none of you think we should know where they are staying.
RNZ News at 6, ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leata tēnei. The Labour Party says it has not received any specifics into a serious fraud office investigation relating to donations made to the party in 2017. In a statement, Labour says it will fully cooperate with any SFO investigations. It noted despite not being advised on specifics, the party has already made statements to media in February confirming that 2 men who were then being investigated by the SFO and had made donations to the National Party had also made donations to Labour. One donation was in 2017 and another in 2018. At the time, Labour Party President Claire Szabo said both were included as donations in the party return filed in the respective years. Otago University law professor Andrew Geddes has told Checkpoint an investigation is already underway for ex-Labour Cabinet Ministers Leanne Dalzell and Phil Goff into how they raised funds for their local body campaigns.
What the Serious Fraud Office is looking at with regard to those donations is the way that auctions were used to disguise the identity of donors to those two candidates. So items would be auctioned, allegedly at an inflated value, and the identity of who had bid on those things was not made clear.
Andrew Geddes says this fundraising technique was used by Labour in 2017. Tight controls will be in place for the sentencing of the Christchurch mosque gunman next month, which is expected to last at least 3 days. Brenton Tarrant has fired his lawyers and opted to represent himself, which means he will be allowed to speak for himself in court. Many fear he will use the sentencing hearing as an opportunity to spread hate speech. A defence lawyer, Marie Dyberg, told Checkpoint in such an extreme case, the judge may force Tarrant to appear via video link to have more control over when he speaks. She says it's very important the sentencing process is fair.
There will be a lot of steps taken to ensure when there is a very unpopular defendant, that person exercises all the rights they're entitled to.
Marie Dyberg. A healthcare provider has been censured for failing to properly check on a frail elderly woman who died after suffering a heart attack and stroke at her home. The Health and Disability Commissioner says the woman did not answer the door during repeated visits from support workers over 2 days in 2018. Calls to the house also went unanswered, and it was not until the second day a support worker finally got in using a neighbour's key. The woman had had a heart attack and stroke and died shortly after being found. The Commissioner says the healthcare provider, Access Community Health, did not have proper procedures for checking on patients. The government is accused of playing politics after promised assistance to help commercial landlords and tenants settle disputes has been delayed. A $40 million fund was announced in early June, following several months of political wrangling within the coalition. However, the legislation never made it to Parliament, as the leader of New Zealand First, Winston Peters, said it didn't match up to what they agreed upon. The Chief Executive of Hospitality New Zealand, Julie White, says it's disappointing Cabinet hasn't come to an agreement.
We're of the understanding that Minister Little was very keen to help out, but things have got delayed, and it's our understanding that this is politics. And again, we urge all parties, this isn't the time to play politics, this is the time to step up.
Julie White. Victoria's recorded 177 new cases of the coronavirus, the lowest number in 3 days, but the state's Premier is warning of a long road ahead. Only one of today's new cases is linked to a returned traveller in hotel quarantine. The state's Premier, Daniel Andrews, says the situation is still very fragile and has urged people to respect the lockdown and follow the rules.
No family will be spared if the strategy doesn't work. and that can be seen in lots of different ways. This is in our hands. It's a very, very complex, cunning, clever enemy that we're all fighting, but we can get there.
Victoria's Premier Daniel Andrews. It's coming up to 4.5 minutes past 6. A top 3 spot beckons for the Tactics on Netball's ANZ Premiership ladder when they play the Waikato Bay of Plenty Magic in Auckland tonight. The Tactics are currently 4th, but can leapfrog the Northern Stars with a win. The Tactics have 3 wins from their 6 games so far and beat the Magic by 9 points when the two sides last met. And the Christchurch-based side is having to back up from a narrow 1-point win over the second-place Northern Mystics last night. The Magic have had 1 win in their 6 games so far and sit in second to last spot, just ahead of the Southern Steel. The West Indies cricket captain Jason Holder rates their 4-wicket win over England in the first test in Southampton as one of their best. Chasing 200 to win on the final day, the tourists lost 3 early wickets before 95 from Jermaine Blackwood got them home. Holder says their performance with the ball on the 4th day set them up for a memorable win. The second test starts at Old Trafford in Manchester on Thursday. A victory in there would give the Windies their first series win in England since 1988. English Premier League football side Manchester City will learn later tonight whether their appeal against a 2-year ban from European competition has been successful. City was banned after being found guilty of serious financial breaches, but lodged an appeal with the Court of Arbitration for Sport in Switzerland. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, I'll be chatting with playwright Nathan Joe, who's mourning the lost art of the New Zealand radio play. We catch up with Pacific Sport with RNZ Pacific's Vinnie Wiley. And Nick Bollinger reviews a sophomore album of power pop from the Beths, blues and boogie from Larkin Poe, and a surprisingly vocal set from the usually instrumental trio Krungbin. That's Nights with me, Karen Hay, in for Brian Crump. Tonight from 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula. Fine spells and isolated showers, areas of fog tomorrow morning. Waikato to Taranaki, including Central High Country, Gisborne and Hawke's Bay. Scattered rain easing to patchy drizzle tonight, low cloud morning and night. Whanganui to Wellington, also Wairarapa, Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury. Fine or becoming fine tonight. Bulla, Westland, Fiordland and Otago except Clutha, mainly fine. Areas of morning fog in many valleys. Isolated showers in Bulla until tomorrow afternoon. For Southland and Clutha, fine apart from some cloudy periods and showers near the coast. Chatham Islands, a few showers. RNZ National. It's 7 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. The Labour Party appears to have been blindsided by news of a serious fraud office investigation into donations it received in 2017. Shortly before 5, the SFO announced it had launched an inquiry, but the details are few and far between. Our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch, joins us now. Craig, what do we know from the party itself?
Good evening, Lisa. Yes, well, Labour looks to be in the dark as much as the rest of us. It put out a statement in the past half hour, which doesn't say very much. It says, we have not been advised of the specifics of the inquiry. However, the Labour Party will fully cooperate. So no details about what donations are in question here, no details about where or who the money might have come from, what they relate to. There is one interesting point in their statement, basically the only substantive point that Labour makes in its brief statement. It points out that earlier this year it admitted that it had received donations from 2 of the men who are already under investigation by the SFO, or who were already under investigation by the SFO because of their donations to the National Party. Those 2 men have been charged, including Jamie Lee Ross and another businessman. They have all pleaded not guilty, and that issue is before the courts now. So we do not know whether or not the SFO's inquiry relates to those men, relates to donations from those men, but Labour seems to think that it may do, or at the very least it wants to suggest that it may do. Otherwise, why else make that link?
And what do we know of those particular donations, what form they took and what value they had?
Yes, so one of the donations was quite small, $2,000 or so roughly, and it seems to have been made in a typical way, and so it's unlikely to be involved here. It was also in 2018. the SFO talks about donations in 2017. The other donation is more interesting. Labor admitted that it had received $10,000 from a man, Heng Jia-jing, who purchased a piece of art at a silent auction in March 2017. Now, the total proceeds of that entire event, $60,000, were transferred to the Labor Party by that same man. Now, Labor says all donations, and it said this earlier this year, after inquiries from media, including RNZ, Labor says all those donations were appropriately filed in accordance with the rules, all were declared, all the authenticity of each of the individual donors at that event were checked at the time by the party. Now, we do not know, as I said, whether or not this is what the SFO is looking into. You wouldn't want to speculate too much, but the use of art auctions, silent auctions, in this way to raise money has raised questions before. Listeners may have heard Andrew Geddes earlier on the program, After 5, an electoral law expert. He is concerned about that practice being used to potentially hide the identity of donors. He wants that tightened up. So potentially that is something that the SFO may be considering.
We're kind of at the point, really, where the list of parties not being investigated by the SFO, parties in Parliament, is now shorter than those that are being investigated. What's going on?
It's precisely right. We're now talking about 3 political parties which are in Parliament being associated with SFO investigations, and just 2, the Greens and ACT, not. So National was involved in an investigation, and now Labour and New Zealand First involved in ongoing investigations. I mean, is there a wider problem here? That's probably a question for somebody else, an electoral law expert perhaps. Andrew Geddes certainly seems to think that there is a problem here. It's certainly not typical or anything even close to usual for this to be the case, for 3 political parties to be involved or associated in any way with SFO investigations relating to donations. And that does suggest potentially that there could be a bigger problem here, maybe with the law, maybe with people's interpretation of the law, maybe with the spirit of the law, which is a phrase that has been thrown about before, potentially a problem. In fact, for Labour, Jacinda Ardern has previously made comments about National and some donations that National received completely separate, but she said at the time that they were not in the spirit of the law. Now, that means here, Labour can't have just followed the letter of the law and say, oh, well, look, we were strictly within the bounds. They actually have to follow the spirit too if they are to live up to the same standards that they've been holding National to. So all in all, I think it's pretty obvious Labour will not be happy at all about this. This is just an investigation. It doesn't indicate guilt. The SFO actually makes that point in its statement. But any headline with the words SFO and investigation is not a headline that any political party wants associated with it. Just ask New Zealand First. Just ask the National Party.
Yeah, well, a bunch of listeners have got in touch, and some of them are aggrieved about the fact that the SFO is making this announcement now and even making the announcement publicly. What does the SFO say about that? Because it does in part address that, doesn't it?
It does, and that is one of the first comments that the SFO director makes in the statement that she puts out. She says that in keeping with the habits or the tradition that it has kept up to this point, in which it made comments at the time about the New Zealand First Foundation, its inquiry into that. It made comments at the time about its investigation into donations to the National Party, which were brought to the public's attention by Jamie Lee Ross. It made those public announcements, and it's saying in the exact same way, it is behaving the same way and making clear or public this investigation into the Labour Party. Now, these other investigations have come to or will come to more of a resolution. You know, I guess the inquiry relating to National resulted in charges being laid against Jamie Lee Ross and 3 other businessmen. That trial scheduled to go ahead in September next year, 2021. Then the New Zealand First Foundation, the inquiry is still going on into that now, but we have been told by the SFO that they potentially, or that it expects to make an announcement of some sort before the election, but it is highly unlikely at this late stage that we're going to see any resolution for this inquiry into the Labour Party. It's not ideal for Labour. It's not ideal for voters who would have hoped to have all the information that they need before them to make up their mind in the ballot box in September. But this is likely to remain an unanswered question.
Thanks, Craig. Good to talk to you. That is our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch. Canterbury's Muslim community fears the Christchurch mosque gunman is positioning himself to deliver a hateful tirade at next month's sentencing. Brenton Tarrant appeared via video link in the High Court in Christchurch this morning, where it was revealed he has sacked his lawyers and will represent himself in court next month. Timothy Brown has more.
The gunman has pleaded guilty to 51 counts of murder, 40 of attempted murder and 1 charge under the Terrorism Suppression Act. He will speak for himself at sentencing after lawyers Shane Tate and Jonathan Hudson applied for leave to withdraw as Tarrant's lawyers because the gunman wants to exercise his right to self-representation. High-profile lawyer Nigel Hampton QC says he's within his rights to do so, and while the sentencing will have to follow the law, it will now be harder to control his messaging.
It should follow regular procedure, the opportunity for him to make his submissions, which will include his ability to offer commentary as to his reasons for doing what he did. And that's where potentially there may be a need for the judge to play a part in controlling that part of the procedure.
It is possible for Tarrant to be held in contempt of court and for sentencing to ultimately take place without his presence. Mr Hampton says he won't speculate on the gunman's motives.
He's entitled to represent himself. He wants to avail himself of that right. He's got to realise that he may be subject to some intervention by a judge if the judge thinks that things are going beyond the realms of what should be placed in front of a court.
His former lawyer, Jonathan Hudson, says he can't reveal the gunman's thinking because his instructions were under legal privilege.
It's his right to represent himself, and he's chosen to do that. We don't have any issue with him doing that. That's probably all I can say, really.
Mr Hudson says it's been a difficult case to be involved in, but he did not wish to elaborate further. Justice Cameron Mander will appoint a lawyer to fulfil the role of standby counsel to assist Tarrant if he wishes. But that will not be Mr Hudson or Mr Tate. The Imam of the El Noor Mosque, Gamal Foda, says he fears the gunman will use the platform to spread hate or to dog whistle to extremists.
I have lots of concerns about this because I worried and very concerned this person to use the court and the New Zealand justice system to spread racism and hate speech.
Muslim Association of Canterbury President Mohammed Jama says he doesn't want the gunman to be able to address the New Zealand public.
Our feeling is we are not like that man to talk directly to the New Zealand people, also in the world, listen that people, because he is guilty.
Muslim Association of Canterbury General Secretary Feroz Dita says he suspects the gunman wants to use his last opportunity to speak publicly to air his hateful ideology.
I can see no other logical reason why he would have dismissed his lawyers representing him other than paving the way for him to speak. And I have a hunch, and I'm quite concerned about this, that he will use this opportunity to view his opinion. He'll use that as a platform for his racism.
Linwood Mosque survivor Abdul Aziz says sentencing will be difficult already.
The emotion will be very, very high, especially for those ones that lost their loved one. It's not easy for them.
Abdul Aziz says he wants the legal process to be over and he hopes it will bring some closure. The gunman is due to be sentenced on August the 24th. For Checkpoint, Timothy Brown.
It is 18 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The wearing of masks has been hotly debated in several countries around the world. It's become a political issue in the US, with President Donald Trump emerging with a face mask on in public for the first time. He'd previously mocked his rival Joe Biden for wearing one. In the UK, the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has recently been spotted wearing a mask in public. But the message from his government is still mixed and confusing. The ABC's Samantha Hawley reports.
Late last week, Boris Johnson emerged in his electorate sporting a haircut and a bright blue cloth face mask. After months of saying there was no scientific backing for the public to wear masks, his message has dramatically shifted.
I do think we need to be stricter in insisting that people wear face coverings in confined places where they are meeting people that they don't normally meet.
It's thought Number 10 is moving to make it mandatory to wear masks in shops, as it already is on public transport. But once again, there's no clear message. No sooner had Boris Johnson made the comments that one of his most senior ministers, Michael Gove, was pouring cold water on the idea.
I don't think mandatory, no, but I would encourage people to wear face masks when they're inside, in an environment where they're likely to be mixing with others and where the ventilation may not be as good as it might.
Michael Gove insists no law is needed, as the British people are sensible enough to do it anyway.
On the whole, my view is that it's always better to trust people's common sense, and I think that individuals and businesses are responding well to that lead.
Confusing too is the continued lack of unity across the United Kingdom. Scotland, for instance, has already made it mandatory to wear masks in shops. And so out of step the nation is with England, the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, may bring in quarantine rules for her English neighbours.
This is not about saying to people in England they're not welcome in Scotland. Of course people in England are welcome in Scotland. Lots of people from England live in Scotland and vice versa. This is not about politics. It's not about a constitutional agenda. It's just about taking decisions that try to protect people in Scotland. If you look at the situation in Australia right now, you can't travel from Melbourne to Sydney because of the spike in cases in Melbourne. The Governor of New York has restricted travel.
A survey shows Brits are among the least likely to cover their faces in Europe, with about half the population having worn a mask during the pandemic, compared to 3/4 in nations like France and Italy. Boris Johnson again.
And it's very interesting because in places like China or Taiwan or Far Eastern countries, they don't actually have mandatory face coverings or mandatory face masks. What it's just part of the way they do things. Now, clearly, we don't have that culture here in the UK, and we have to think about how we make it happen and how we make it work.
The British government could make it mandatory to wear masks in shops within weeks.
And that was the ABC's Samantha Hawley with that report. The race to develop a COVID-19 vaccine entered a new phase today. Scientists at the University of Queensland have started human trials, with 120 volunteers checking into a Brisbane clinic this morning. However, they've warned there are no guarantees the project will be successful, and they say the world will need more than one reliable vaccine. The ABC's David Sparks has the story.
Around the globe this year, some of humanity's best minds have been working relentlessly on one of history's most important scientific missions, a vaccine for COVID-19. And after months of research, a team at the University of Queensland has announced a big step forward.
We have clinical trials that are beginning today and will progress all the way through to the beginning of next year. And it's depending on how those are going, there may be cases for emergency use of the vaccine delivered earlier. But in terms of large-scale rollout, middle of next year to end of next year.
Project co-leader Professor Paul Young says 120 volunteers will take part in the trial at a clinic in Brisbane. One of them is Helen Sullivan.
Quite exciting, actually. I've never been part of anything like this, so to see what the process is and how stringent it is has been really quite eye-opening.
She says her motivation to volunteer for this project is simple.
To get the world back to normal, to get people working, to get people back seeing their families, quite important.
Professor Young says testing of the vaccine so far shows it's able to induce antibodies that neutralise the coronavirus.
Our studies so far have provided all the safety data and positive immune responses necessary for ethics approval for the trial to go forward, and that's why we're here today.
The World Health Organization says in the last 24 hours, 230,000 new cases of COVID-19 have been confirmed. That's the biggest daily jump since the pandemic began. With teams around the world working on different versions of a potential vaccine, Professor Young says this is a race where everyone's on the same side.
We're not racing each other. We're all racing against the virus and trying to get there as quickly as possible. And as many people have mentioned before, this is a global pandemic, and we're going to need vaccines that can spread it right across the globe to the billions of people on this planet. And the only way we can do that is with multiple vaccines. So we're hoping that a number get through to the end.
But without any guarantees of when or if a vaccine will be ready, experts say containing the spread of the coronavirus is critical.
And that was the ABC's David Sparks with that report. While leeks were in the headlines last week, this week it's courgettes. See what we did there? Well, you might know them as zucchinis. At some places you'll pay $12 for 3 single courgettes. Now, if my maths is right, that's about $4 a courgette. $8 for a chubby plump one. So why so pricey? They're mainly water anyway, aren't they? Well, CEO of Fresh Produce Importers Association, Kevin Nolder, joins me now. Kevin, where do we get our courgettes from for a start?
Mainly out of Queensland at this time of the year once the local production drops off.
So why have the prices gone nuts?
Well, the simple fact is we can't source any courgettes or melons out of Queensland at this time because of a virus issue they've had over there, not COVID, but a cucumber virus. So we're just waiting for the departments to work out a system where we can start up again as soon as possible.
So what's that virus done to them?
It's basically a production virus. It's caused biosecurity issues, so we don't want it in New Zealand. So we want to make sure that whatever measures are in place are effective to stop that coming in, and once those measures are in place, we'll be up and running again, hopefully.
So it's about transferring the potential to transfer any disease here to New Zealand by importing the product.
That's correct, yes.
So what kind of prices are we talking about at the moment? If you want courgettes, what do you have to pay?
Well, I've heard some obscene prices today. You mentioned, $20 a kilo or upwards of that. So that reflects that there is little or no domestic production available in any sizable quantities for retail.
So what would you normally consider a fair price to be then, at about this time of the year, I mean?
Maybe $5, $6 or $7 normally, yeah.
So what are we to do, Kevin? What's the replacement for the courgette?
Well, that's a good question. There probably is none. Whatever's available on the local supermarket shelves is what we're stuck with at the moment. But as I said, hopefully we'll have some new measures in place, and we'll be up and running as soon as we can.
So what do you think the time frame might be for that?
Not sure. Hopefully within the next month or so, but as with bilateral and quarantine issues, some things can take a little bit longer than what we anticipate.
Kevin, how much would you pay for a courgette? How high would you go? This $4 a pop. Would you be a man who buys 3 courgettes for $12?
No, I don't think so. I'm not that a great fan of that at that price. So maybe I'd substitute for something else.
But we just can't work out what that substitute would be. So while I've been talking to you, someone's just messaged to say tomatoes have gone ballistic too in terms of prices. Is that the case?
Yes, similar sort of situation. Again, local production drops off in the middle of winter, obviously, with the sunshine hours and the cold weather. So we'd be looking at supplementing the local supply out of Queensland again. So that program will probably start up anytime soon once the prices hit $10 or $12.
Well, thanks for joining us, Kevin. That's Kevin Nolder, who's the CEO of Fresh Produce Importers Association there, saying in some cases, $20 a kilo for courgettes. What can we substitute with them with? Let me know, 2101 on the text. Trade in ivory has declined, but trafficking in pangolin scales has boomed, according to the latest UN report on wildlife crime. Julian Satterthwaite reports.
The illegal global trade in ivory has declined, but the good news for elephants is offset by grim tidings for other species. That is according to the latest United Nations report on wildlife crime. Angela Mee is research chief at the UN Office on Drugs and Crime. She spoke to Reuters on Friday.
One of the main reasons that we see is the decrease in demand, particularly in Asia and particularly in China, where clearly surveys done in terms of the use of ivory in retail markets has decreased. China has also put forward a very important legislation that is a ban on ivory selling in all China that may have also have an impact.
But the trade in tiger parts is on the up, and pangolins are now among the big worries. The reclusive creatures are covered in scales used in traditional Chinese medicine. Friday's report says that is now a key driver of illegal trade. It says the animals are mostly sourced in Africa.
The trafficking of pangolin is going in the opposite direction from the ivory, where we see that even between 2014 and 2018, only in these 5 years, more than 370,000 pangolins have been seized.
Pangolins may now be the world's most heavily trafficked animal, according to the report.
And that's all we've got time for this evening. Thanks for joining us and thank you for all your feedback. Our news team will keep you up to date overnight. First up, back first thing.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Labor says it's not received any details about a serious fraud office investigation into donations made to the party in 2017. A defence lawyer says the judge at the mosque gunman sentencing will take steps to ensure what Brenton Tarrant says is within the appropriate boundaries. Authorities in Victoria, which has recorded another 177 coronavirus cases, are concerned about a large outbreak at an aged care centre. And the search for a missing fisherman at Lake Wakatipu in Glenorchy has been suspended for the night. Those are the headlines. Our next news will be at 7, then Nights with Brian Crump.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
We just sort of had this pent-up demand over a lockdown period, getting itchy, wanting to spend because we've had nothing else to spend on besides food and maybe alcohol.
Live with local, national and international stories and some music.